Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing amazing. We're continuing our Civil War. How Caesar won the Great Roman Civil War. Pompey's been dead for a while now. Believe we just did the Battle of Raspuna. Pretty sure we did. We're in North Africa. So let's continue this marvelous journey that Caesar is on.
Caesar's first priority was improving the defenses of Ruspina and creating entrenchments from the town to his camp and to the sea. In doing so, Caesar ensured his communication lines would be kept safe, while also providing a safe landing ground for any reinforcements and supplies. Caesar had been surprised by Labienus's tactic of mixing light troops with cavalry, and decided to mimic it, pulling light marines and archers off his ships in order to do so. Meanwhile, Scipio was en route to unite his force with Labienus and
So they're about to have 60,000+ in one place? That's not good for Caesar.
Petreius, bringing with him almost all of the Optimate leaders and the entirety of their army, bringing its total to more than 60,000. Such an army would have already been larger than the one Pompey had, and to make matters worse for Caesar, there was also a possibility that the king of Numidia, Juba, would join Scipio with his own force, including its famed elephants.
Not only the elephants, more cavalry, which is just Numidian cavalry. We already know how good they are.
With fortifications improved, Caesar turned his attentions to supplies. The Optimates had previously stripped the area of corn, and most of the local workforce was pressed into their army, making the harvest of that year particularly poor. Caesar was forced to purchase supplies from wealthy individuals living in the area, and rationed them out to his army. A number of his scattered transports were hunted down by the Optimate navy and were captured or burned. Caesar ordered the remainder of his vessels to patrol the harbour of Ruspina to keep the area clear for the anticipated arrival of troops and supplies from Sicily. Just when things were starting to look disastrous, Caesar had a stroke of luck.
Don't tell me Mauritania is going to partner with them.
The Optimate army under Scipio had paused briefly at Utica, where Cato, the figurehead and political leader of the faction, was based. While the army was there, Cato began chastising Pompey's sons for failing to achieve as much as their father had by their age.
Bro, what has Cato done? What has Cato done? Now, if he's done something, tell me below. But what has he done?
Shamed and hoping to prove himself, Gnaeus took 2,000 slaves and freedmen and attacked the nearby kingdom of West Mauritania, ruled by King Bogud. The Mauritanians lured Gnaeus close to the town of Ascarum before sallying out and quickly defeating the small force. Humiliated, Gnaeus withdrew to the Balearic Islands, but his actions had far-reaching consequences. Having left a sizable garrison at Utica, Scipio now marched to Labienus and Petreius, uniting the two armies and establishing camp 5 kilometers from
I don't want to just, we're going really fast past that. Is Mauritania allegiant to the Caesarian faction? I would imagine so, right? They're the status quo. They're the Romans on their doorstep in Iberia. But why would we do that preemptive attack, Gnaeus? Why? Because of Cato's comments? Gosh.
Caesar's position. They immediately began using their large cavalry forces to keep Caesar within his fortifications, making his supply situation even worse. Juba began marching to his allies, hoping to assist in a quick and definitive win over Caesar, but Gnaeus's actions now showed their consequence. The king of East Mauritania, Bocchus, heard of Juba's departure and invaded Numidia to avenge the Optimate attack on his brother Bogud.
That's so funny.
Commanding the Mauritanian armies was Publius Sittius, who had been operating in Africa as a mercenary since the Catiline conspiracy. He successfully captured the Numidian city of Cirta and then proceeded to pillage and sack the surrounding area. By this point, Juba had almost reached Scipio.
But he's got to go back now.
But upon hearing the news, pulled back to defend Numidia. Meanwhile, Some of the local citizens had begun sending messages to Caesar, complaining of the harsh rule of the Optimates. Some towns even requested garrisons, pledging to feed and house them in return, an offer Caesar gladly accepted, sending 3 cohorts in order to improve his supply situation.
And that's one thing Caesar's continuously done, is he's been favorable to the populace.
Initially, Caesar planned to wait for better weather to ensure his troops would make the crossing from Sicily safely, but now he ordered that they be sent no matter the conditions, showing how desperate he was. Scipio was not idle while all this was going on. Labienus, in command of the majority of the Optimate cavalry, kept up a relentless harassment campaign, fighting a number of skirmishes with Caesar's cavalry that ventured out to patrol. Labienus kept searching for ways of keeping Caesar's forces occupied, including attacking the towns of Leptis and Aquila, but he was repelled by Caesar's cohorts now garrisoned there. Nevertheless, these attacks were effective at keeping the pressure on Caesar. Similarly, Scipio would march his army out of camp every day and draw them into battle formation, including the elephants, hoping to intimidate the recruits in Caesar's army. Caesar made a show of indifference, keeping his men at work on their fortifications, but he never drew up his own army for battle. He knew that for any chance of victory, he would need more men, particularly more veterans. His best play was to keep his men behind their fortifications of trenches and palisades and bide his time. His patience paid off. Sallust had arrived in Circina, the site of a large Optimate grain supply.
Wow. So Sallust became a historian, so we have a lot of that's very rare to have first-hand accounts of what happened.
Which was poorly defended. He easily chased off the garrison and immediately sent the supplies to Caesar. Simultaneously, 2 experienced legions, the 13th and 14th, were finally dispatched from Lilybaeum. Good luck with the weather and Caesar's patrolling fleet allowed all the legions and supplies to arrive at Ruspina with relative ease. Soon after, Scipio sent 2 Gaetulian spies into Caesar's camp to assess the new situation. However, the Gaetuli, who had greatly benefited from the actions of Caesar's uncle-in-law, Gaius Marius, during and after the Jugurthine War, immediately defected to Caesar. They informed him of Scipio's numbers and the morale of his men, in particular that the Optimate 4th and 6th legions were wavering and eager to join Caesar.
It's GG's.
Though Scipio and Labienus had done well to keep up the pressure, they had delayed too long and lost the initiative. Caesar now had the men and supplies he needed to go on the offensive, and wanted to force a battle with Scipio before the Numidian army would return. On the 25th of January, he sent the transports back to Sicily to get the rest of his army, and then marched his full force out of the camp. His first objective was to take and fortify the semicircle ridge of hills that surrounded the town. Looking to use similar tactics to those at Dyrrhachium, Caesar quickly seized as many of these hills as he could, ordering fortifications to be built to create a line of palisades across the tops of the hills. Hoping to force Caesar back to his original position, Scipio marched his full army out of camp with Labienus in command of the vast cavalry force, drawing up for battle. Caesar initially thought this was a bluff, but when the enemy approached in formation, he drew his legions up on the hills for battle, sending a small detachment of Spanish auxiliaries to seize one hill still held by Scipio. The Numidians holding the position there were quickly chased away, and Labienus led the majority of his right wing of cavalry to cover their retreat. Caesar noticed that Labienus had moved too far from the main Optimate battle line.
Yeah, very, what do you call it? Very aggressive in Labienus's part.
And sent his own left wing of cavalry to charge through the hole, before turning back to attack Labienus from the rear. A large estate prevented Labienus from seeing this movement until the enemy cavalry was already behind him. With the cavalry pushing from his rear, and the Spanish auxiliaries attacking from the front, Labienus was caught in a pincer and ordered a withdrawal. He and the fast Numidian horsemen were able to extract themselves, but his Gallic and Germanic cavalry was slower. They were surrounded, and despite brave resistance, cut down to a man.
So already, one of your, maybe not your entire cavalry, but a lot of your cavalry is already gone.
Seeing that his right flank was in shambles, Scipio quickly ordered a retreat and pulled back to his camp.
Dang.
Feeling robbed, Caesar did the same. However, soon he tried to force a battle again, this time marching his army towards the town of Uzitta, a major water source for Scipio, which was located just outside the Optimate camp.
And in North Africa, water's very important.
Scipio marched his army out of camp, positioning them on either side of the town in a strong defensive position. Eagerly, Caesar again drew his men up for battle, but was reluctant to attack Scipio in such a strong location. For the remainder of the day, the armies stood opposite each other until Caesar ordered a retreat. Frustrated once more, Caesar returned to his camp and continued to further fortify his position on the ridge.
A lot of posturing, and we see this from Caesar continuously, from the Gallic Wars to the original battles against Pompey to now. He just postures a lot, and he's tactically patient.
Scipio had been delaying for a good reason.
Juba.
Immediately after the cavalry skirmish where the Gallic and Germanic cavalry had been lost, he had sent word to Juba demanding his help. Juba, who owed his kingdom to Pompey, obliged. He left his general Sabura, the victor of Baghrades, to fight Sitius, and marched to Scipio with 3 Numidian legions trained in the Roman style, 800 heavy cavalry, more light infantry and cavalry, and 30 more elephants.
Okay, so that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad for Caesar.
The Optimates now had 8 Roman and 3 Numidian legions, approximately 55,000 men, almost 16,000 cavalry, 60 elephants, and perhaps as many as 20,000 light infantry, a total of around 90,000 men, a truly colossal force. It was now Scipio's turn to go on the offensive. His fleet had been hunting down any of Caesar's ships that had been blown astray in the crossing from Sicily, and the prisoners were brought to him. He now displayed a number of captured veterans of the 14th outside his camp, and had them tortured to death there, and their bodies left outside.
That's crazy. Fellow Romans. Wow.
He also once again began drawing his army out of camp every day to further intimidate Caesar and his men. These actions had the opposite effect, however. The execution of his men enraged Caesar, and he was also encouraged by Juba's numbers. They weren't as significant as he feared, which meant that Sitius was distracting much of the Numidian force, and confirmed that Scipio had no more aces left up his sleeve. Following this, a deadlock emerged. Both sides regularly drew up for battle, but no serious engagement was fought, neither wanting to be the one to attack a fortified opponent. A number of cavalry skirmishes were fought, with neither side able to gain a significant advantage over the other. 2 more veteran legions, the 10th and 9th, arrived, and Caesar attempted to use them to break the stalemate, constructing 2 long entrenchments from his camp to Uzitta, despite the
Creating a bottleneck. We've seen that so many times when you're outnumbered.
constant harassment from Labienus's cavalry. A new camp was made at the end of these entrenchments, where siege weapons such as scorpions and catapults
Ooh, scorpions are gonna be really. Dude, can you imagine? Scorpions would actually be a really good offensive weapon for elephant warfare
were constructed
against
and
elephants.
began bombarding Uzitta. Caesar's constant pressure and the close proximity of his new camp to that of Scipio's encouraged some of the Optimate troops, mainly Gaetulians, but also a number of men from the 4th and 6th legions, to change sides.
Yeah, I mean, I think Caesar's gonna it's just gonna snowball with these defections.
Scipio couldn't allow this to go on, and once again ordered his army to get into battle formation. Caesar did the same, but the broken ground in front of Scipio's army dissuaded him from attacking, despite the 2 armies now being less than 200 meters apart.
Whoa.
After squaring off for half a day,
I can't remember how far 200 meters is. Because I'm American over here, so we're gonna look real quick. 200 meters yards. What would that be? That's not that. That's like 218 yards. Okay, like 2 football fields. Almost in range.
Caesar withdrew back into camp. That is when Labienus launched an attack on Caesar's retreating cavalry and light infantry. The legions were close enough to prevent a complete disaster, but the attack gave Caesar food for thought. It was only a matter of time before Labienus was able to strike a deadly blow with his superior cavalry numbers. Soon word was sent that the last 2 legions Caesar pegged for this campaign, the 7th and 8th, were en route from Sicily. He also heard from some deserters that Varus, who had been stationed at Utica with the Optimate fleet, planned to attack them on the crossing. Immediately, Caesar rode to Leptis himself, took command of his fleet, and surprised Varus.
That's crazy.
The Optimate fleet was chased
What a move by Caesar. Caesar just gets stuff done. We saw the same thing happen in the Siege of Alexandria.
away, and the Caesarian legions were guided to land safely. Caesar now felt comfortable enough to send 2 legions out of his fortifications to find supplies in the nearby estates. At this point, Optimate deserters informed Caesar of an ambush planned by Labienus, and Caesar managed to surprise his old ally, killing 500 light infantrymen and routing the Numidian cavalry.
Labienus is very trusting of his army. He just tells them everything.
Unfortunately for Caesar, his legions were unsuccessful in their foraging, making it clear that he needed to move his entire army to find food. Caesar left a garrison in Ruspina, burnt his camp, and marched out with his full force. He foraged the area around Agar and Seta, constantly shadowed by Scipio's army. After foraging around Seta, Caesar began retreating to his camp, roughly 23 kilometers away, but was once again attacked by Labienus and his Numidian cavalry and light infantry. This time, Labienus kept up the attack, retreating when Caesar's men turned to confront him, and then continuing the harassment as soon as they began marching again.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the best way you can combat a Caesarian army in the middle, like, of flat lands, is what I'm imagining this is.
Caesar's cavalry took the brunt of these attacks, and he was eventually forced to pull them from the rear and use his legions to fend off the Numidians. His heavy infantry took less damage than his cavalry, but his army was now moving incredibly slowly, only managing to cover 300 meters in 4 hours.
It's getting dark.
Night finally set in, and Labienus withdrew his troops. But he had been successful in doing significant damage to Caesar's already much smaller cavalry force. Impressed by how effective Numidian light cavalry and light infantry had been against him, Caesar began drilling his men in tactics to combat them, such as how far to retreat from them and when they should turn and throw javelins. He was soon met by the last Sicilian reinforcements, bringing his force to 12 legions, 5 newly raised and 7 veteran.
How many people's in that?
Roughly 3,000 to 5,000 cavalry, and an unknown number of light infantry. Caesar's veteran legions had taken casualties, some might even be at only half strength, and so establishing the size of Caesar's army is difficult, but a number of around
67 is not bad. You're going up against like 90 though.
60 to 70,000 seems reasonable. Though outnumbered overall, Caesar had more veterans than Scipio, as the Optimate army was largely made of fresh recruits and conscripts. Caesar also brought elephants from Italy. Although useless in battle and intended for the Roman games, they allowed Caesar to train his troops. His men were taught where the elephants were vulnerable, even in armor, and his cavalry practiced throwing dummy javelins at them.
So they probably didn't have these buckets on them. Probably.
Familiarizing the horses with the elephant's smell and sound. It is a testament to Caesar's generalship that even on campaign, he still took the time to train his troops to address new threats.
Yeah, twice. Numidian cavalry and elephants.
The stalemate continued. Caesar was moving from town to town looking for supplies, with Scipio shadowing him. Labienus attempted to keep up his skirmishing campaign while Caesar marched, but Caesar's training had paid off. 300 men from each legion were assigned to not carry any baggage and instead act as a quick response rearguard, fending off all of Labienus's harassing attacks. Finally, Caesar had enough. Time and again he had formed up his army for battle, only for Scipio to decline. The towns in the area that he raided were not important enough to force a reaction, and Labienus's attacks remained a constant source of frustration. Caesar needed to be able to force Scipio into a situation where he had no choice but to fight. So on April 4th, Caesar abandoned his camp at night and moved to Thapsus.
To where?
Thapsus was a major city in the area, holding a large port, supplies, and arms and armor. It was a target that Scipio would not be able to ignore a threat to. Caesar, having marched through the night, soon arrived at the city.
So they're way ahead of schedule versus those three.
Immediately besieging it and fortifying his own position against a possible Optimate attack. Outside of the city of Thapsus was the Marsh of Mocnene, which effectively forced any approaching army to take one of two narrow passages, hugging either the northern or eastern coast. Caesar had chosen his target well. He established
Very convenient target too.
two forts, one in the eastern passage, which was garrisoned by 3 cohorts, which effectively blocked that pass, and one surrounding the city of Thapsus. His strategy was to force Scipio to take the northern passage, meaning Scipio would be forced to attack him from only one direction. Scipio soon arrived on the scene. He initially intended to take the eastern passage, but seeing Caesar's fort, abandoned this idea. Leaving a small force under Afranius opposite Caesar's fort, he ordered Juba, Labienus, and the Numidian cavalry to encamp in a separate camp nearby. He then commanded a forced march around the west of the march to the northern pass with the rest. It seems that Scipio's strategy was to try and catch Caesar in a pincer, hoping to eventually make a simultaneous push on his position through both passages.
I mean, if it worked, it's gonna work, right? So, but you still gotta beat Scipio head to head now.
Quickly, Scipio ordered part of his men to begin construction of a second camp, while the rest of his army drew up for battle in front of them, with the elephants on either flank in front of his cavalry. Caesar could not believe his luck. Scipio had taken the bait and was now offering battle under terrible conditions. His men were already fatigued by the long march. Part of his army was building a camp, and a significant portion of his army, including most of the Numidian cavalry, was too far away.
Did he not think Caesar had an advantage here? Like, what was going through his head?
Leaving 2 of the rookie legions encamped around Thapsus, Caesar eagerly formed up the rest for battle.
Very similar size, it looks like.
He deployed his army in the classic 3 lines. The 10th and 7th legions were stationed on the right, and the 8th and 9th on the left. The center was likely held by 2 of the other veteran legions, the 13th and 14th, with a recruit legion on either side of them. Mixing recruit and veteran legions like this was a favored strategy of Caesar's. His last legion, the 5th, was split into 2 and stationed behind each flank,
Reserve.
acting as a 4th line. Their role was specifically to handle the elephants. In case of a charge from them, the front lines would part and it would be up to the 5th to kill them. Archers, slingers, and light infantry mixed with cavalry held his extreme flanks.
Favorable.
Caesar and his men noticed a lot of movement and jostling in Scipio's line as men moved to and from the camp. His veterans, many of whom were already supposed to be retired and who had spent the last couple of months frustrated by the lack of a decisive battle, urged Caesar to attack. Caesar was hesitant, perhaps thinking that it must surely be a trap. It is also worth noting at this point that Plutarch claims that Caesar had an epileptic fit before the battle, which perhaps was the reason for the delay.
Dang, didn't even know he had those.
His veterans, however, had had enough. A trumpeter of the 10th or 7th, without Caesar's orders, sounded the charge, and Caesar's right flank surged forward. Realizing that there would be no way of
So there's not consistency now with the line.
restraining his men, Caesar decided that he must fully commit and rode ahead to the 10th and 7th to take personal command of them. He ordered the slingers and archers on the right to target Scipio's elephants opposite them, panicking the beasts and sending them rampaging into their own lines.
Oof.
At the same time, the elephants on Scipio's right charged Caesar's left, but his legions quickly parted as they were trained to, the cohorts of the 5th Legion taking the brunt of their charge. They fought bravely, using spears to jab at the vulnerable and sensitive points on the elephants, blasting trumpets loudly to further frighten them. The elephants were soon panicked and
The symbol for the 5th would become an elephant. That's cool. That's cool. That's cool.
turned to run back to Scipio's army.
So now you have no flank. It's over.
Scipio's
God dang.
line was
God dang.
now being charged by his own elephants, with Caesar's legions following close behind. Panic had set in almost immediately. The left, fighting
Shrouded.
Caesar's 10th and 7th, was the first to break, the entire line following shortly after. Some tried to fight, but most were stampeding towards the camp that was still being built. Caesar now had all the momentum, and his men easily cut down the fleeing and disorganized Optimate forces, as well as those who were constructing the camp. The garrison at Thapsus attempted to sally out to distract Caesar's army, but the 2 legions left in the camp easily repelled it. These legions then marched down the eastern corridor to the camps of Afranius and Juba. In a full-scale rout, Scipio's men fled around the western edge of the marsh, desperately trying to reach these camps, with Caesar's men in hot
Yeah, now you're outmatched down there, so what's gonna happen?
pursuit. It was a disaster for the Optimates. When Scipio's men reached the forts, they found Afranius's camp already overrun and Juba's being assaulted by Caesar's 2 other legions.
Did they not think that Caesar's not pursuing them?
The Numidian king, seeing Caesar's main force now approaching, gave up the fight and retreated with Labienus, Petreius, and what cavalry he had left. Caesar's force stormed his camp, easily taking it. Caesar's men massacred many. Dio blames this on Caesar. However, most sources say Caesar ordered the men be spared, but that his battle
Usually that's his... I actually feel like Caesar would spare him. Because usually that's his, like... That's usually what he does. Usually. Especially when it comes to the Romans.
frenzied soldiers disobeyed. It seems likely that Caesar did not order the massacre. A master propagandist, Caesar knew the power of mercy, and was renowned, even in his time, for sparing the vast majority of his Roman enemies.
Yeah.
The battle was over. Some sources suggest that the Optimates lost 10,000, others suggesting as many as 50,000, while Caesar's losses were as little as 50 or as
Yeah, we're gonna probably say somewhere in between there. More likely a few hundred.
many as 1,000. It was a decisive victory for Caesar. Following the battle, the Optimate leadership was scattered. Labienus, Varus, and Pompey's son Sextus had managed to escape and would eventually make it to Spain, where they would continue to resist Caesar. Afranius, along with Faustus Cornelius Sulla, collected the survivors and began pillaging Mauritania, planning to gather enough supplies to then also cross to Spain. However, they were caught by Sitius and then killed.
Taking on Mauritania. Good for them. Good for them, Sidious.
Petreius and Juba fled to Numidia, confident they would find support there. Sitius had been successful in defeating and killing Juba's general Sabura, however, and the Numidians now turned on their king, barring their gates to him.
Wow.
With no options left, the 2 men decided to commit suicide.
Well, yeah.
They had a final dinner and settled on dueling each other, so that at least one of them may die honorably in battle. Juba won the duel, killing Petreius, and then had one of his slaves kill him. As for Scipio, he too hoped to retreat to Spain. Gathering a few supporters and a small fleet, he set sail, but was caught in a storm and forced to make port at Hippo. Caesar's fleet, commanded by Sitius, found him, and a minor naval battle was fought.
Whoa.
When defeat here was inevitable, Scipio killed himself, the last Scipio of any real historical note.
All these cowards, bro. All these cowards.
The only Optimate leader left in Africa was Cato in
Ah, feed him to the lions.
Utica. As Caesar's army closed in, he made his final preparations. He held a feast with his friends, and then
Cato's definitely just gonna, be a coward here.
retired to his bedroom, leaving his children in the care of Lucius Caesar, a distant cousin of Caesar's, though a supporter of Pompey, telling his son, "I, who have been brought up in freedom with the right of free speech, cannot in my old age change and learn slavery instead." He then read Plato's Phaedra, and after finishing it, stabbed himself in the stomach. In death, Cato did rob Caesar of what would have been one of his greatest triumphs, that of being able to claim that he spared the life of his greatest enemy. Caesar was extremely frustrated by Cato's suicide, apparently saying, "Cato, I begrudge thee thy death, for thou didst begrudge me the preservation of thy life."
Gosh. Yeah, Cato is one of the biggest instigators to this entire thing. So, Caesar's very merciful. I think Cato in the middle of the Colosseum with lions would have been the most pragmatic thing to do, honestly. Guys, thank you so much for watching. We got a little bit more to go in this civil war before we get to the Caesarian demise, where we'll see the rise of Antony and the rise of Augustus and Agrippa and some others. But yeah, this was interesting. So Caesar basically has Africa. Now, of course, Hispania or Iberia always has to have some rumbling. So we're going to probably continue that. Thank you guys for being here. You have a great rest of your day. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out and bye-bye.